Last time that I saw your one, your top was in a place like this one. But let us you like.
I'm not going to go far. I don't want to be.
Look it down, please. Not the
You see, right now we're live on YouTube. So we have
Claro, Nico, estás emitiendo ya.
en YouTube. Sí. Do you wanna give me?
Share this with somebody else?
And so we're gonna stop the video. Un, dos, un, dos.
¿Tienes audio privado del Zoom?
Sí, para hacer una prueba. Un, dos, un, dos.
Could you start? Hi everyone.
So it is, es un placer para mí introducirles a Darren Sleep de la agencia de certificación Sustainable Forestry Initiative in North America. Yo conocí a Darren hace ya 20 años en Guelph, mientras él hacía su doctorado en ecología en Guelph, y yo hacía un postdoc allí. Y desde que lo conozco es un chico muy entusiasta que en aquella época se dedicaba a jugar con búhos y con murciélagos en el bosque de Ontario. Tratar de que esos animales vivieran más felices de lo que vivían en ese momento. Más tarde Darren ha dedicado toda su vida a la sostenibilidad y el desarrollo de proyectos medioambientales que en realidad han tenido un impacto muy importante al menos en el ambiente donde él vive, es decir, en Norteamérica, participando en un sinnúmero de proyectos de este tipo, y además, bueno, no ha detenido su producción científica, la cual ha sido muy prolífica, prácticamente más de 30 publicaciones en revistas de alto impacto, publicando en temas como ecosistemas de mamíferos, pájaros, como sostenibilidad de la producción de carbón. Y algo que es realmente muy relevante, que yo, de hecho él me ha llamado la atención sobre eso, que yo, para mí nunca había pensado en eso, pero es muy relevante, que es cómo transmitir los resultados científicos para que se conviertan en políticas medioambientales. Es decir, eso es un tema realmente muy importante porque no es fácil transmitir resultados científicos. Y bueno, sin más, para mí realmente es un privilegio que lo oigamos hoy. Please, Darren, go ahead. I'm happy that you're here. Thank you very much. And I say that it's in holidays, and I should say I appreciate that you have decided to talk to us. Please.
Gracias, Raúl. Wow. Gracias para la invitación. Ok. ¿Mejor? Ok. La invitación para venir a su universidad para hablarles sobre la sostenibilidad del sector forestal del Norteamérica. Lo siento, me encanta el español, pero no hablo mucho. Entonces, the rest of this will be in English. So that's, I've been working on my Spanish, but I have a long ways to go. So thank you for the invitation. And thank you for the introduction. I think you said nice things. I don't know that you said nice things. We'll find out later. But it's good to come in and give this talk. So, no, that didn't work. Try again. Okay. So, we okay? No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Who am I? As Raúl said, my name is Darren Sleep. I am a lead scientist with SFI, or the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. My background is in wildlife biology. I'm a wildlife biologist by training and an ecologist. I've studied a lot of forest ecology, as well as rare and threatened species, endangered species, red-listed species, and globally. And I've done a lot of work in protected areas ecology. And as Raúl mentioned, I've spent a lot of my time working on science policy integration and finding out ways to help policymakers understand science and integrate it into environmental policy. I work for SFI, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and we have this grand vision of a world that values and benefits from managed forests. And our mission is to advance this sustainability through forest-focused collaborations. So we work very hard to collaborate with lots of different organizations, universities, governments, anyone really who wants to collaborate and do positive things for forests, we work with them. Our work is divided into 4 different fields. The one that we're probably most known for is standards and supply chains. This is the work we do to help provide assurances that forests are well managed. So we set a standard that gets renewed every 5 years, incorporating the latest science, and then companies apply our standard on the managed forests that they work on, so they can get a stamp of approval and put on their products and to do things like ESG reporting, which I'll talk about later. But realizing that sustainability is broader than just the forest itself, we also work in education and career pathways, community and indigenous relations. This is helping young people understand the forest that they benefit from, and making sure that all communities and all peoples benefit from forests as much as anyone does. And finally, we have this conservation and collaboration, which is where I spend most of my time. But because we are a very what we call a cross-pillar organization, I support all of these different fields. So unfortunately for all of them, I do work in each of their departments. So the science and the conservation get spread evenly across the organization. The SFI is governed by a three-chambered board. So we have members, this is a CEO-led board. So the chief executive officers from all these organizations sit on our board and give us direction over time. So we have folks from the economic chamber, which are the companies that are using the standard, the environmental chamber, which is environmental and nonprofit organizations that help guide our work, as well as social organizations, again, helping ensure that all peoples benefit from forests as much as anyone. Certification, SFI only operates in North America. So this represents a certified area in North America over time by these various different standards. You can see PEFC Canada, that shouldn't say PEFC Canada, don't worry, but that actually should say FSC Canada. Okay, no, that's FSC then. Okay, this is PEFC, right? So this is CSA. All right, so PEFC Canada is the program for the endorsement of forest certification, which is active here in Spain, actually, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. The American Tree Farm System, ATFS, you can see this is primarily for small landowners in North America. FSC, or the Forest Stewardship Council, and there's SFI, and we continue to see this growth over time as more and more area gets certified to SFI. All large producers of forests in North America, in Canada for sure, are all certified to one of these standards, and obviously significantly to SFI. Whoa. There. As I said, our standard gets renewed every year, and there are elements in our standard that cover all these different aspects of environmental law and regulation. You can see we have, for example, forest health and productivity. So there are objectives that companies must meet as they manage their forest to deal with health and productivity. Conservation of biological diversity, protection of special sites. So those might be ecological sites, or they could be heritage sites or historic sites on their lands that they have to protect. Recognition and respect for Indigenous people's rights, and so on. Each of these different categories must be met by any company that's certified to SFI. What's really important to me is objective 12, which is forestry research, science, and technology. So to be certified to SFI, you must, as a company, be actively involved in research. So that's a requirement of the standard. If you are certified to SFI, you are doing active research. If you are not doing active research, you're not certified to SFI. So it's that simple. But this drives a lot of money into research and helping us get better at what we do. The standard is what we call transparent and credible. It is verified and accredited by these certification bodies. So all these organizations have staff who are trained in SFI and they understand SFI. And these are the organizations that get hired by the companies to verify that companies are meeting the standard. We have no financial ties with these organizations whatsoever. They are completely third-party independent from us. So they are trained in our standard. And once they're certified to do our standard, they get hired by these companies to verify it for the companies. So it's completely third party and not connected to us. In an international context, SFI is endorsed by PEFC, or the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification globally. If you look at this pie chart, this is all of the certification in the world. You can see that FSC has roughly 40% of global certification, and the striations you see there are all different standards. So each different country has a different standard that is under FSC. Over here, you can see PEFC endorses a lot of different standards for a lot of different countries, but we represent the largest single standard globally at roughly 36% of global certifications, and that's only in North America, so the US and Canada. So that is all the forests in North America that are certified to SFI is one standard across the across the board. So we do represent a big chunk of that pie for PEFC. Here in Spain, again, to put this in context, I pulled this information off the PEFC's website. You can see that there's a lot of certified forests in Spain. In particular, it's worth pointing out Navarra up here has the highest amount of forest certified in the entire country, which is very encouraging. I was happy to learn this. But again, for details on Spain, you should probably talk to PEFC and don't talk to me. Although I'd love to learn more and come back and spend more time in Spain gladly. So one of the things we want to talk about is sustainability. What is sustainable? How do we define sustainable? So simply put, sustainable means meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So that's a very broad general definition of the term sustainable. But if we add the word forestry in there, it's a lot more specific. So this has to do with using the art and science of forest management and silviculture to bring products from the forest and to market. We know these products are green, they capture carbon, they biodegrade, so they're not like plastics that get stuck in the ocean forever. But at the same time, we have to make sure we use reforestation and silviculture to maintain the carbon sequestration of the forest, to maintain the wildlife values of the forest and the biodiversity, the air purifying, the water protection, all the many values and benefits of the forest is maintained through sustainable forestry. Now, it's tempting to think that sustainable forestry is just conservation science. It is just the connection to the science that we do in the forest, so we understand how the forest operates. But I would argue that sustainability in the forest is much broader than just the biology, just the forest, but it also touches on community engagement, and in particular in North America, on reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. So that's a big part of being sustainable. If we are not engaging the community over time, you are not sustainable. Further, educating the next generation becomes important. If we raise citizens who are cognizant and understand the forest and understand the value they get from the forest, as they say, you only protect what you understand, what you value. So educating the next generation becomes an important part of sustainability. And then all of these things must be communicated. If you are doing these things, if you are educating, you are doing conservation science, you're doing community engagement, but it's not communicated in a way that both policymakers as well as the general public understands and can appreciate, it's of no value and it's not sustainable. So all of these things make up sort of the map of sustainability. So we start in thinking about social innovations, for example, and how we can come up with sustainable solutions within the space of forest management for social innovation. In North America, the SFI standard is partnered with over 40 Indigenous organizations across these 10 million hectares or 4 million hectares, 10 million acres or 4 million hectares, depending on the flavor you prefer. And we partnered with over 180 Indigenous communities on various initiatives around the forest. So we think it's very important to not only as an organization to be engaged with these communities, but to have the companies that are certified to SFI engage with these communities. We're also working on programs to grow what we call future conservation leaders. So we have a green jobs program where we've placed young people between the ages of 18 and 25, I believe. Over 6,000 of these green jobs have been created in partnership with the Canadian government. So the government gives us some money to administer this. Companies that want to hire young people to do these jobs that are outdoor jobs often, that may be involved with also Parks Canada, the Canadian Parks Council is involved with this work. So these young people can get jobs for the summer, for example, and the money we get from the government pays for half of their salary, and then the government pays the other half. So basically these organizations get students for half price for the summer. But in all this, it's not just about randomly hiring a bunch of kids, but we've achieved gender balance. We've got over 900 Indigenous youth that have been involved in this program from 100 different communities, and we've had 400 different employers across Canada get involved with this work. This program is currently being adapted and moving into the US now. So we're going to try and do the same thing in the US. Obviously, we're looking for funding to do it. But this has been a very successful program. We hired a young man to manage this program, and he's gone gangbusters with it and really was quite successful. With those 900 Indigenous youth jobs, we've launched these My Green Mentor community programs, allowing young people in these communities to see themselves in the forest sector. You don't, a lot of people, myself included, I never saw myself in the forest sector and I came into it. But if when you're young, when you're in high school, you actually can see, like, I could have a role in this sector, it gives you a more opportunity to be engaged. And the number that we have engaged in this program has doubled every year as we've been going through this. So we're really, really keen on this work. And finally, I mentioned the standard. The standard now has a component we added it. I guess it was there before, but we've really highlighted it this year and built it up. Objective 8 within the standard, the revised standard, that requires certified organizations to not just respect the rights, but to build relationships with the communities that overlap with the forest that they're working in. So it becomes this, it's not about getting ticking a box and just getting approval, but it's building these meaningful forest-focused relationships with these people. And that's really key to the work we're doing, to get a strong relationship that aligns with the values and respects the knowledge and value of Indigenous peoples across North America. And as I said, we've got over 40 different communities engaged and certified, by the way. There's a number of Indigenous communities that have certified their forests to the SFI standard. So we're really quite happy about this. In terms of education, there's a program in the US that's been there for quite some time called Project Learning Tree, or PLT. And about 6 years ago, SFI took PLT and brought it into our own. I think at the time it may have been struggling financially, but we brought it along and it is now becoming much more self-sufficient. And we've got this focus on these Project Learning Tree career pathways, as well as forest literacy. We find that a lot of young people in particular coming out of high school have very little understanding of the forest, what happens in the forest, how the forest is managed. So we've been developing a lot of tools to increase forest literacy among young people. We've got a number of educational products that are available that can be downloaded. I'm sorry, I don't think they've been translated to Spanish yet, but some of them are in French already. So we've got educational materials, again, forest literacy framework that are available, and this PLT career pathways, again, so young people can see themselves in the industry going forward. So this is the kind of material we develop. We also develop curricula for kids from K to 12, not teaching them what to think, but teaching them how to think and connecting them with the forest. So students are still writing, they're still doing math, but they're thinking about those things in the context of a forest and learning about the forest as they go. So we end up raising, if you will, green children that understand the forest. And just I don't want to say it's just for fun, but we recently released a Forest Quest, which is an online game that you can go in. I believe it's free to play, and you meet these different characters from the forest. You do different activities, little management plans, and identify birds and things like that on the website. It explores green jobs and the benefits of sustainable forest management. So this was I ended up being the sort of science backing for this. So they would come to me with, we want to do this. And I was like, well, that's not real. That's crazy. And, we worked it through and came with this really amusing little game that you can check out. So this is some of the stuff that we do through Project Learning Tree. But of course, my heart, as I said earlier, I'm a biologist, I'm a wildlife biologist. My heart is really thinking about the sustainable pathway, going from data and science, baseline and beyond, going up through scientific communications, reporting for things like ESG, environmental social governance metrics, and nature positive metrics on a global scale, as well as this is a really important piece to me, this science communication, or telling the sustainable story so that the general public can understand it. And that's really, I think that's really where we affect public policy, is when the general public can understand what's going on, they get much more engaged. So when we think about the basic research, so as I said earlier, we engage with consultants and government scientists and academics. It's really important that we test assumptions about sustainable forestry. Do our methods work? Are they successful, and are they doing what they think they will do? So when we harvest a forest and we replant that forest, does that forest come back the way we expect it to? Do wildlife respond to the forest the way we expect them to, so that we can make sure we're maintaining those things? We also want to quantify baseline conditions. And this is a particularly challenging one, especially for things like carbon. But we really want to know that are our practices any better than business as usual? Are we just doing the same thing that we've been doing for centuries, or are we actually getting better at what we do? That requires an understanding of where we're starting. How much carbon is in a forest when we start? How much is there 50 years later after we've been managing it? And then we need to provide data to tell these stories. When we're going to communicate to the public, when we're going to communicate to policymakers, we need to know about the data. What is the good news that we can share about what sustainable forestry is doing? So this all becomes very important. And of course, we want to create new tools and new practices to improve what we're doing. The forestry is all about getting better over time. And I quote, I think I'm quoting a former supervisor of mine, because he said this all the time, but it could be that it was some famous person that I don't know who. But I was attributed to Mark Brigham. He said, research without publication is recreation. And I would actually say research without communication is recreation. And there's an important distinction between publication and communication, which I will get to in a minute. So back to this doing the science. The requirement of the standard is that certified organizations must be actively engaged in research, and we track that. We ask them every year, how much money have you spent and what have you spent it on in terms of research? So we can see that in 2021 alone, the company certified to SFI invested over $78 million, that's US dollars, in scientific research in the forest in these various categories. You can see how much they put into each different bucket, if you will. And then when we count that and think about how much that has leveraged in terms of other organizations that kick into that research, we find that $1.9 billion, almost $2 billion have been invested in forest research since 1995 in North America because of the SFI standard. So as a researcher at my heart, this speaks to me. This is how we get better at what we're doing. I know people say, the expression is, and I don't know if this expression translates to Spanish, it's not rocket science. Forestry is actually much harder than rocket science, and we need good research to inform it. And 80% of these research dollars are linked to what we call conservation-related objectives. They're biodiversity, species at risk, and things like that. So to me, this is one of the key elements of the standard and what we do. But it's not enough, because we found there's a lot of questions, very specific questions that that research might not be touching on. So at an overarching level, looking at what the sector needs broadly and even globally in cases, we started what we call the SFI Conservation Impact Project that focused on these three elements of water, biodiversity, and carbon. This is to funnel money directly from our budget into these research projects. Because we felt brand owners, these are the people who are buying the forest products, they need to know the impact of their sourcing. They need to know what it means if I'm making a pizza box for my company, what does my choice of material mean for the forest? So we really want to communicate that. Obviously, certified organizations need to understand the value of what they're spending on certification. It's not cheap to be certified, so they need to understand the value. The stakeholders, and this could be environmental organizations, this could be the general public, they need to understand the value of certification. And again, very importantly to me, this improved understanding facilitates continual improvement. We can make the standard better if we have more research. So we started this program in 2006, I believe, and it's been running ever since. And we've invested 63 different conservation grants with various partners to get a better understanding of this. Since 2010, we have awarded over 100 conservation and community partnership grants. So that's 63 is just the conservation grants, but there's been another 40 or 45 or so that have been community grants to help communities understand their forest better. And that since 2010 has totaled over $4.4 million. And we think this is very directed funding to ask questions that we think are really important across the sector, and not important necessarily to any one company, but important to the sector as a whole. For example, this is a big topic. This is, for those of you who may not be familiar with this creature, this is not a moose. This is a woodland caribou. In Canada, this is it's a focal species. It's an iconic species. It's actually on the back of our quarter, which it vexes me when people say that that's a moose. It's not a moose, it's a caribou. This is a very important species culturally to the indigenous people of Canada. And it is one of the species that between climate change and land use change from forestry and others, it has struggled to stay in the landscape. So we've put a lot of money into trying to understand this issue and trying to get better at it and to develop new practices to help maintain caribou on the landscape. So we've directly invested about $350,000, and that has translated with other contributors to about $1.9 million over the last 5 years. So this is an important species. It's one of those species that I've done so much work on that I feel like I should own a caribou at this point, which I don't. But our CEO, Kathy Abuso, continuously asked me to get back into the caribou issue. And it's become, as you can imagine, it's become a very political issue in Canada as well. But we do other work that's not just caribou focused. We've done some work, particularly in a cross-border region with 2 organizations in North America. The American Bird Conservancy is a very big grassroots organization that focuses on birds in the US. And the Boreal Avian Modeling Project is a very scientific, data-driven organization based out of the University of Alberta initially. And they work on bird data of the boreal and hemiboreal. And we saw these 2 organizations as being a very good partnership. And we brought them together and said, look, can we do a project looking at birds and forest management in a cross-border region? So we went to the Lake States. So if you think, depending on how well you know North America, I think Ontario and Minnesota and Michigan, that area, and got them working together. So this is a project that's been going for a few years now, looking at better engagement with partners, working on both the science data as well as the grassroots organization. So it's a project that's been going for a few years now. We've worked with the Splatsin people in the south central part of British Columbia, looking at how forest certification and forest practices affect culturally significant plants. So these are plants that are important to these people for food and for medicine. So we want to make sure that forest management does not negatively affect these species of plants that are important to their culture. So this is some work that we've been doing, looking at plant regeneration post-harvest. So you go in, measure the abundance and vigor of these plants, do the forest management, and then come in and see how they've come back years afterwards. So that's another project. And finally, this one, again, talking about baselines, trying to understand what the baseline is. One thing we've been working on is trying to measure the biodiversity at a broad scale across North America on SFI certified lands to find out how well forest certification and management is protecting these species. It's a very challenging project because in Canada, the data is publicly available for the space of where companies are operating. In the US, it's privately held data. So we've had to do a lot of begging and cajoling and calming and reassuring that we will not give their data away. But we've been collecting data. So we've started these areas like this, like a pilot area. This is New Brunswick in Canada. This is Maine in the US. So we picked counties around the border and got the folks together to give us their data. But we're really working with NatureServe to try and understand the biodiversity on the SFI footprint in those regions. So we're trying to do this now. The project is to do it across North America. So when we talk about communicating science, one of the things we think about is, as a researcher, you're thinking publication. So I publish, and then I want to know how well that gets out there. So just for fun, this is the kind of thing that researchers do for fun. Instead of going out and enjoying a football game, we do something like this, where you collect all the data of publications you've made over the years, and you look at the impact, how many times they're cited. So as if SFI were a researcher, I calculated SFI's H-index, has an H-index of about 9, which is not too bad for what you would call a sort of a young researcher. A little disappointed to find it's also my H-index. They're not the same publication at all, but so I've either got to get better or SFI's got to not get better or something so I can be above it, but we'll work on that. But in any case, we're seeing an increased impact of the science work that SFI is doing in the science marketplace, if you will. So we're happy about this. We're seeing more involvement in thought leadership. Whoops. And speaking of thought leadership, we stay engaged with a number of organizations. So we sit as members or councils or chairs on various things like this is UNECE. I actually chair the boreal team of specialists globally. We're engaged with the IUCN and then more North American organizations like the Society of American Foresters and the Wildlife Society and the Canadian Institute of Forestry. And again, we publish papers, with collaborators, again, trying to make sure we are sitting at the forefront of thought leadership with respect to forestry and forest science. But all this has to translate into something very useful. And this has been a growing issue, a growing topic of importance among investors and buyers, is this environmental, social, and governance reporting, developing metrics so that investors can quantify both your risk and your benefit to the environment as an organization. So we work with our partners, our global companies that are certified to SFI to help give them data so that they can better report on ESG metrics. So obviously, if you're going to be reporting about what you're doing environmentally, science and data is needed to support your claims, and it's vital to ensuring that there's reliable metrics that are used for this accountability. So we've developed a number of supply chain projects to help develop metrics for reporting. So a company can report, if I build a mass timber building of a certain size, here is the benefit to the forest over the 100-year life cycle of that building, depending on how long you set that for. And of course, it's very important that you measure the right things and then you measure them right. So there's a double challenge there. So one of the things that we did in our last standard revision was the development of a climate smart forestry objective. This was a very interesting process to go through. A lot of our certified organizations, in particular in some parts of the South, were less keen on this, but they saw the real need in terms of ESG. You'll recall Larry Fink from BlackRock Investments came out with his letter to investors and said, we will not invest in any company that has not considered their climate change impact. That was a watershed moment for this community. So when we revised the standard, we said, we don't need to just build climate change into the standard. We need an entire objective focused on climate change. So I was able to convince our stakeholders that this was important, and then they gave me the pen and asked me to write it. So I think I lost in that deal. But in any case, we have two really big pieces of the objective. One is to identify and address climate change risks, to figure out what are the things likely to happen on your forest and try and mitigate them, and then look for opportunities to mitigate the effects of climate change. Can you change the way you're managing to sequester more carbon or to reduce your emissions from your operations? This was no small task because a lot of companies don't have the scientific expertise on board to understand the science that's out there. So we had to provide a lot of guidance. We had to give them a lot of, here are the topics that you should be thinking about. Here's the research out there. Here's some resources you can go to get help. We can't actually do the work for them, but we can point them in the right direction to get that. So the idea is, don't focus your effort out here. Don't focus we don't want you to focus on things that aren't likely to happen and they're not going to have big effects and you can't do anything about. We want you to focus on things that will happen and you can change and that will have an impact on your operations. The idea is to reduce risk over time, move these concerns sort of to the origin point so they're not that big of a deal. That's what we're trying to get them to do. Does it work? So this has been in place now since January of 2021. The standard has been in place, and you have to ask this question: does it really work? And I got a phone call from this gentleman, Laird Van Dam, who's a colleague I've known for some time. He's an older gentleman who's been doing forest certification audits for 30 years. He said, he essentially said, I was getting bored of doing certification audits. Nothing has changed in 20 years. He said, but this, I can tell you, has made a difference. He sees companies that are not meeting the standard, but then are making the effort to meet the standard and changing the way they operate. So he said the certificate holders are more than being aware, and now they are engaged in practical actions and proactive planning. So this was one of the most encouraging phone calls I've gotten in a long time. This was like the work that SFI is doing around climate is making a difference. But we still need data. We still need to know what the carbon looks like on our forest landscapes. So we opened a partnership with this organization called NCASI that does scientific research across North America on the forest sector. full disclosure, I have an in there because before I was with SFI, I worked with them. So it was an easy switch. I just talked to them and said, you guys need to do this work for us. We gave them some money to do the work, and we developed a carbon assessment tool for the US footprint. So it looks like this. It is available if you're curious. The one question we get a lot from our partners in Europe is there something available like this for Europe? And the answer is no. Not that it couldn't be developed, but with this data set in particular is built on what's called the FIA forest inventory and analysis data that the US Forest Service collects, permanent sample plots that are resampled every 5 years across the entire US. The states you see that are not yellow, they're blue of some shade, are states that we have SFI certified forests. And we can use this data to generate a really good understanding of how much carbon is stored on the SFI footprint, and look at how the storage of carbon changes over time. We know that every year there's a certain amount of carbon that is stored in products that is released because it gets burned or thrown out or something like that. Similar to paper products, we tend to think paper products don't get retained. It's not entirely true. It's just a very small portion of the profile that is paper products that does get retained. If you think about libraries and bookstores and other places, there is a certain amount of fiber that gets retained as carbon. And of course, the wood products tend to stay for a very long time. And that adds to mitigating climate change. The more carbon we can move from the forest into permanent storage and then regrow that forest, of course, that reduces carbon in the atmosphere. So this is the kind of tool that we've developed to try and help certified organizations understand their carbon inputs. On this map, you can go down to a single sampling unit, so you can get closer to what's going on in your forest, so they can better report to things like ESG metrics, how they're doing with respect to climate, for example. We've used data like this, as well as some modeling that we did in Canada, to get a very ballpark estimate of what is stored on the SFI footprint. So we estimate that there is more carbon stored in the SFI footprint in North America than would be emitted by 30 billion cars in a year. And for the record, 30 billion is roughly 21 times the number of cars that are currently operating in the world. So I would love to give you a better way to say this, but the bottom line is there's a lot of carbon that gets stored every year in the forest. This, by the way, is the static amount that's stored. On top of that, there's a sequestered amount that gets added every year. That's a much harder number to come up with, but we were able to do this as far as the pure storage goes. So this is the kind of thing that we try and communicate to our certified organizations to help them with their ESG reporting. So again, you've heard me talk about these different elements of SFI, the social side, the environmental side, and the governance side. Again, these are all things that we're trying to provide leadership towards ESG reporting for our certified organizations. So if you are certified to SFI, you then can say something about all of these things because you are certified to SFI. So it helps companies report on ESG so they can report to their investors and they can report to their customers in their sustainability reporting that this is the kind of thing they contribute to. Now, this is a very important slide to me. So this is, I've just been talking a whole lot about scientific communication. So this is what we do as scientists, as academics, we write new papers, we contribute new knowledge to the scientific community. The audience for all of this is scientists and technical experts who understand this stuff, who understand physics, who understand chemistry, who understand ecology. It allows feedback, the scientific process, can constantly refined and tested. Complexity is expected and welcomed. And there's no translation needed. Yes, 5 minutes. Sure, no problem. And we publish this in peer-reviewed journals. Science communication, on the other hand, is a lot different. This is to inform and educate and raise awareness. The audience may be the general public or maybe policymakers, and it generates an appreciation of science in our everyday lives. Complexity must be translated and explained, but not dumbed down. This is not about speaking to the public like they are children, but in fact, it's finding a way to communicate that complexity in a way that the public can understand. Science communicated by scientists does help. It gives credibility, but it's not enough. The public needs to hear the stories in a way that they can relate to. But again, not dumbed down, but adequately explained. I love these two, I assume these are computational physicists who have this, then a miracle occurs in the middle of their, I think we should be more explicit here, he says. We need to be explaining this better. And that's what communicating science is about. So science can be complicated and the public doesn't want the details in most cases, but dumbing it down can be perceived as misleading. What are you hiding? Or condescending, those terrible academics. So what we really need is science communicators who can convert the scientific apples to the oranges that the public can understand. So at SFI, we've hired Steve Weiland, who's our Director of Conservation Communications, and he writes these great stories about the research we're doing, in this case about the research we did on gopher tortoises in the US, and translates that in a way that the general public can appreciate it and sort of get into the story and feel something from those stories. And that's what's really important to sustainability, is getting people to feel what we're talking about. And of course, social media, we're constantly tweeting and I don't know what you call the other ones, releasing things on YouTube and putting things on LinkedIn and on Facebook and things like that. And we track what kind of an impact that has, how many people are checking those stories out and how many people are looking at them. So the key sustainability takeaways here is that sustainability goes well beyond conservation science. This is not about the pencil-headed scientists who just want to do science, science, science. It goes far beyond that. Science is obviously needed to support sustainability claims and to developing reliable metrics. And it's important that we measure the right thing at the right time and the right place. Scientific communication, although important, is not the same as science communication, and the difference between those two is very important in terms of sustainability. And at SFI, we're working to tell that sustainability and communicate it to multiple audiences. Again, that's the scientific community, corporate and government reporting, the general public. The idea is to help people really appreciate the forest, appreciate the value we get from the forest, and appreciate the ecology and the ecosystemic values from those forests while still producing the products that we need and love. And with that, if I've done this right, my last slide. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, or I'm going to need someone to translate that for me? Any questions at all?
First, thank you very much for your talk. And okay, now we have some time for questions. So, question, please.
No questions?
I can do the first.
Yeah.
Yes,
Sí.
you can go ahead.
Estoy muy interesada en saber si pueden valorizar los servicios ecosistémicos y cómo cuantifican lo que se le puede pagar a un propietario forestal por eso.
Okay, I have something like.
I got some of it. I think I got some of it, but give it to me anyway.
I will do my best for you because I have questions.
Ah, yeah.
That's better.
Yeah.
That's great. That's excellent. You will do better job than I.
Tendrás que salir al micrófono, lo único para que te escuche todo.
Okay. David, can you give me that question again in English?
Yes, but he didn't hear.
Oh, you didn't hear it. Okay. Okay.
Yep. Sí, cualquier.
You can go.
Me preguntaba que para nosotros es importante, estamos intentando valorizar los servicios ecosistémicos de forma que los propietarios vean también valorizada su acción selvícola en los montes. Entonces, el problema que tenemos es cómo calcular la compensación que le podemos dar al propietario pues por esos servicios que proveen en conservación de agua, en secuestro de carbono, en conservación de biodiversidad. Entonces quería saber si hay algún sistema que sea fácil y extrapolable, pues, o al menos que nos permitiera copiar un modelo o algo así para poderlo implementar aquí en Navarra. Y otra cuestión, ya no me bajo, pero la segunda es, aquí tenemos un problema de relevo generacional en los propietarios forestales, también en las empresas que se dedican a hacer silvicultura. Me ha parecido muy interesante la parte de trabajar con los jóvenes, están viendo si ese trabajo directo con las comunidades está suponiendo que se generen empresas de trabajos que se dedican, que generan economía. Quizá el problema en Estados Unidos es diferente que aquí, que no tenemos arraigo rural, aquí se pierde población. Entonces, genera eso arraigo en el territorio para que los jóvenes se queden en sus sitios y vean una apuesta de trabajo en el sector forestal. ¿O solo está sirviendo, y digo solo entre comillas, pues para mejorar las condiciones de biodiversidad y que el resto disfrute de eso? No sé si me explico.
Got it. Thank you, David. I'll keep this handy. I'll let you. Teamwork. Okay, two very different questions, and I think I can answer the first one much easier than the second one. So the first question is there a way to value ecosystem services in terms of economics? And that's something that I know the academic community has struggled with a long time, trying to understand how we can value ecosystem services and therefore compensate producers for prioritizing those things, biodiversity and water and whatnot. Of course, I don't know the European system, but in North America, carbon markets are becoming more of a thing. So if you can demonstrate additionality of carbon on your landscape over time, you can actually get compensated for that as an extra market value. So that's obviously the easier one of all of them. To my knowledge, there isn't an ecosystem service for biodiversity or water yet, although you can do biodiversity offsets where you set something aside, and if you can find a government agency or even sometimes investors who will pay you to set that land aside and maintain it for biodiversity. But I don't know of a simple model that I can point you to, unfortunately, except for the carbon markets, which are the most straightforward one. Your second question is much more challenging, and that's that generational handover from sort of older forest landowners. I don't want to say old because I'm aware that I'm getting old very soon, and I will be in that category soon. So what we found is working with other organizations like the Black Family Land Trust in the US, where we found that was exactly what was happening. Is there were these older families that had forests in their family possession, and they were just selling them off. And often the highest bidder in places like Florida and Georgia are developers who are turning the forest into housing developments. And this organization helped these families realize the value of their forests as something sustainable and something that can, feed generations for years to come. So helping them find that transition, helping young people invest in both their careers and in terms of finding investment vehicles so they can start companies or maintain existing companies. I've driven around a little bit around Pamplona, and I've seen some of these small towns that are sort of dying out, and I can understand that would be a challenge. I don't know the immediate solution to that, but I can certainly appreciate the challenge that you have. What you end up with is a forest resource that is far removed from markets. So you can still harvest that wood, but it's a long truck ride in with emissions and costs. And at some point, you have a mill and you draw a circle around it, and beyond that circle, it's not profitable to bring that wood in anymore. And I can totally see that's a challenging problem. Good question, so thank you. Preguntas? Oh. Okay.
So that means that at the time that you do comparison.
Yeah, you need to use a microphone. Yeah.
At the time that you do comparison between two situations. So, how did you estimate which is the value of one caribou? For instance, you have a field with a lot of things that they are beautiful, and you are deciding if you cut the trees or not, or how much trees you have to cut. So, and then you do it, and after that, of course, what you want is a comparison to know what did happen. If in reality, what did you predict it, what did happen or not? So what is the methodology for doing this kind of prediction? So the value of a forest as a whole. So
So
animals, everything included.
yeah, so that's a very complicated question, but we do think about, especially research in forest ecology, we think about it at a very large landscape scale. It's not at a single stand. The years have been filled. The scientific literature is filled 20 years ago, 30 years ago, with many students going out and comparing this piece of ground that they cut all the trees to this piece of ground that's fully mature forest, and counting the biodiversity and counting the comparison between the two. And that's a false comparison. The real comparison is between the harvested area and the burned area to see what happens to those two plots. But if you think about it at the landscape scale, it's about maintaining these different values somewhere on the landscape in a connected way. So if we're talking about caribou that tend to prefer older mature forests, you have to keep older mature forests. So if you harvest here, the caribou will move into the older mature forest. When this forest has come back, then you can harvest that and they will move back. But it is a very, especially for caribou, it's a very long-term project, 25, 30 years, to see the females reproduce and the animals move around the landscape, and tracking all that, and it's very expensive. So you can do it that way. You can do modeled simulations, looking at how that landscape is expected to change. But these are very complicated projects, and we could probably sit down and talk about this for many hours to help understand how that's done. But then you're going to tell me how particles move through a silo or something. So yeah, yeah, it's way easier, yes. No more questions. That's okay too. Hmm.